Hello everyone, welcome to EMD Media. We are back with the H panel after 1 week break. And those who are following us on YouTube, Facebook, please share, subscribe, and like so that many can get our material. The H panel starts now. Great. As usual, it's great to have you back, gentlemen. And today we'll be talking about, as usual, we'll follow the same format, but Africanization propaganda and arming the genocide war. This is a topic for today. It's great to have you back, Faisal, Zgail, and Yosef has sent his regrets today. He will hopefully join us next week. So we can start as usual with the first, what stood out for you this time for 2 weeks. It's a very eventful week, as everybody would realize. Faisal, you want to start with that?
Yes, good evening to all of you. I think the one that stands for me, which cannot be ignored, is the if you will, the strategic and tactical change that TDF took in the ongoing war. Depending on who you are and what point of view you follow, their exit from some key points and rearrange their strategy, or being pushed out, whichever way. But I think what that brings into the play that cannot be ignored is the external involvement in this civil war. And this thing reminded me what happened last week with the introduction of massive drones and air power into the conflict. Took me back about 100 years ago, exactly to this date, December 3, 1921, when the Somali nationalist Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan was attacked by a tripartite forces, including Britain, Ethiopia, and Italians. And basically, after he was not being defeated in terms of foot soldier and guerrilla war, the British, for the first time in African history, brought planes from Aden to attack the establishment and fortresses of the Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan. And there is a very teaching poem that he coined at that time, which really applies to this situation, both geographically as well as in terms of international interference, as well as the role of the Middle East in the African conflict. The Sayyid's poem goes this way: they brought flying eagles from the skies, and those eagles came from the Arab world. They brought it from Adam, he says. When you look at the role the United Arab Emirates is playing in the conflict of the Ethiopian civil war, and it is unfettered introduction of its drones to the Ethiopian civil war, not only does we learn from the Sayyid's poem the role of the Middle East in the African affairs, but at the same time, the renewed and modernized involvement of the United Arab Emirates in the Ethiopian conflict. And that will probably later on take us to the internationalization of this conflict, the role the powers of China, Russia, Turkey, and others are playing, while the United States is idly, and I will use that word, idly watching this conflict and watching when autocratic system is forming and taking place in the Horn of Africa. So that is to me, and it took me back to history, but that history is applicable to the current situation, both in terms of the role of international weaponry, as well as the role of the Middle East in this African I would say, distorted African image that the Arabs always play, and probably we will come back to that issue later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Faisal. Professor Rizka?
Yeah, I think the continuing drama of the civil war in Ethiopia had a different turn this week. And it's interesting that Faisal talks about the technology of warfare, the role that the technology of warfare plays in the colonization, the subjugation, and the depredations of people who are not armed to the teeth. So the role that outsiders play had always been preponderant, and it's still continuing. And what makes this civil war very different from any other civil war that had been fought in Ethiopia is the fact that you have a leader who likes drama. And this war, the turn that it took this week, was another chapter in the drama of the civil war. The entire intention, and this has been 2 weeks since we first discussed this horror issues, was designed by the prime minister. Designed not for turning the tide of the civil war, not about bringing peace, not about bringing sanity to the madness of the civil war. It was about the drama in which he will enter the cities of Kambolcha and Desi on a white horseback. He brought about 12 divisions, 12 divisions of Ethiopian and possibly Eritreans and other recruits through Afar, trying to get to a weak link in the defense of the supply line of the Tigrayans through Chifra. The idea was at the end of the day, at the end of the conclusion of his dream, the whole campaign was named the Menelik campaign. The Menelik campaign would bring him to Kambolcha. He will liberate Kambolcha and enter the city of Kambolcha on a white horseback as Menelik III. So this never-ending drama, which is not about conflict, political conflict, which is not about what they say that the Tigrayan region was not playing by the rules. It's none of all of that. It's none of all of that for the Ethiopian Emperor Menelik III. That's not what it is. It's always about him. It's always about his grandiose plan. It's always about his childhood dream, out of which he could not grow. It's always about entertaining that he would be the king that would ride this horse into the city. So it's all about that. So the drama continuing cannot be ignored, as Faisal said, because the Zamecha Menelik, you could see it with the badges, with the handkerchiefs and other paraphernalia that telegraphs that this was Menelik's war. And there is no shame in it. There is no shame that they conjured up Menelik again, as they're trying to impose Menelik, the Menelikian Concordat, on the rest of Ethiopia. No shame whatsoever, as long as it serves the purpose of whatever goes in the mind of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. That cannot be ignored. So I just wanted to add to that. But what really stands out today is what happened in among the Karayu massacre. What it is simply to deny Oromos to have any leadership. They have killed the artists, the organizer, the artist organizer. They've killed Hachalu Hundessa, targeting the leadership, the cultural leadership that could mobilize the Oromo people to stand up for their own rights. In the wake of the murder, they have imprisoned other leaders, Jawar Mohammed, Bakala Garba, Dejanit Aha, all of this from the Oromo Federalist Congress, and other leaders, the entire leadership of the OLF, and other prominent individuals among the Oromo. Now, for Karayu, they went for the traditional leadership, for the Gada leaders. So they murdered the Abba Gada, the Abba Dula, the Abba Sa'a, and the entire presidium of the Karayu Gada was murdered in broad daylight by Bilsegenda. So the act of denying Oromos any leadership, whether that is a cultural leadership, political leadership, and the traditional indigenous leadership, which had existed among the Karayu to this day, they started targeting them as well. There is reason for that, which can we go back to it. But this really stands out for me, that the targeting of Oromos and denying Oromos any leadership so that the rest of Oromo could kneel down, that is continuing. And the Bilsegenda Party, the Prosperity Party, took it to new low, targeting the traditional leaders of the Oromo, of the Karayu. One must know that it is not about this the Bagada, one Bagada. It is also the coming Bagada of the succeeding group. It's also the leadership that preceded before. Nothing is left. About 14 are confirmed dead, and about 16 or maybe more than that have been disappeared. So that is really what stands out for me.
Maybe Faisal, you want to interject? Maybe after that, I think for our audience it would be helpful if you could speak a little bit about the GADA system. I mean, I know it's a big system and needs a lot of time, but I think it's in the service of our audience to understand the context of this killing. Faisal, you can interject now.
No, I think while Eskel was talking about the Oromo question and the atrocities exacted against the leadership and the presidium, which is, to those of us who are close to that issue, to the Southern question, this is not the first time, this is not the last time, and we, but pain never goes away. So I'm glad he mentioned. This week was also momentous for the Somalis in the sense that November 29, 1954 was the last act that the Anglo-Ethiopian Treaty was memorialized, and when the Somali region of Haud and reserve area and parts of the Ogaden were ceded illegally to the then Abyssinian government after the Second World War as a trophy to Emperor Haile Selassie, who helped the Allied forces. Interestingly enough, several movements is spurred out that week, including the now very well taught and well mentioned Congress for Somali Cause, whose declaration was released and spread throughout the media, including Oromo outlets, Tigrinya outlets, Amharic outlets, as well as Somali medium, the last publication being on the well-read and highly touted wardernews.com. I think there has been several momentous developments around this struggle, and the Somali was the last one that I just wanted to add to Skialis. As you know, the Somali region is literally on a thin razor kind of piece. There is such an untapped and latent movement inside and outside that nobody should really take for granted the current precarious peace that has been worked out mainly thanks to ONLF, which to this point chose really to sit out and watch things because of the kind of politics that exists in the Somali region. So I just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you, Faisal. So maybe before we move to our the topic of the day, Professor Ezekiel, it would be great if you can speak to the subject of the Gada system and the leadership and what it meant, and you can compare it maybe what happened in the past. I don't, as far as I'm concerned, I don't recall this number of leadership killed at the same time, but you can speak to that subject as well.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, when people talk about the Gada system, which is, by the way, now registered as the intangible heritage of humanity by UNESCO, that the Gada system is a unique Oromo invention. In most cases, it is developed, described as a political military system and part of the social organization of the Oromo, the indigenous system of social organization. But I think it is just not the governing system or the military system which organizes the Oromo society or organized the Oromo society um, in its own context, in its own historical context before the invasion of Ethiopia in the 19th century. I think one of the anthropologists that studied characterizes this as an Oromo civilization which grew out of 5 centuries of evolution, out of a deliberate, rational, and legislative transformation. So, in general, in a narrower sense, the Gada system is the Oromo's indigenous political, military, and peacekeeping system. But in the broader context, it is simply the totality of Oromo civilization, which governs political, social, economic, and religious life of the Oromo. It's also a mechanism of education, socialization, peacekeeping, conflict resolution, judicial administration. It's the totality of the Oromo society, it's Oromo civilization. It was kind of suppressed politically in the 19th century, but it also fell into disuse as a result of the internal economic and social transformation within Oromo society. But in the last 30 years, and I want to underscore this, in the last years or 3 decades, which the current the occupant of the prime minister's office described the dark days of Ethiopia. It was, in fact, in during those 30 years, 3 decades, where recognition of the culture and the cultural ethos of the nations and nationalities in Ethiopia were recognized. It is during that period that this political military ritual system of the Oromo, which had what was ignored for many decades, was revived. Was revived not just as a heritage, but also as a governance system which could be adapted into the modern context. It is in this context that the Karayu revived and brought it to the open. Not that they forgot to live under the Gada system or abandoned living under the Gada system before that, but it was revitalized, and it is this leadership that was massacred yesterday.
I think that gives us a good context. Thank you so much. So for our topic today, the Africanization propaganda. Actually, this is we chose this topic given that the state media and the prime minister were repeatedly saying a number of things about calling all black people, all Africans to fight to save Ethiopia and against. This is, for example, from Fana Broadcasting Corporate from November 23rd. Uh, he's looking for, calls on all blacks to stand with Ethiopia. And the largest and oldest news agency in the country, a state news agency, against calling the prime minister calls our black people to stand with Ethiopia and mentions the Pan-Africanism. So this is where we are now, and we know that where the prime minister stands in terms of uh, African Americans, black people, all that, and so on. So I just want to have your reflection on this. Maybe Faisal, you can reflect on that. I know you have a background related to the subject we are talking about as well in terms of academic background.
Thank you. Well, I think despite the fact that the concept of Pan-Africanism is cheapened and overexploited here, I just like to remind our audiences to find an article written by none other than Ibsa. He was an Oromo intellectual, I think, who died in 2018, who in a 1991 African Studies Conference presented a very, very powerful argument on Pan-Africanism and the Africanity in Ethiopia and who is really at the cusp of claiming African heritage, African culture, Africanity. And I think what Eskiel was just describing, the gathered system, is probably, in my opinion, the closest and purest indigenous organic African heritage that we have in the so-called Ethiopian empire. Mr. Ibsa's argument literally debunks the whole Ethiopianized Pan-African thinking. And this whole concept of Ethiopians being, Pan-Africanists and the pride of Africa, in my opinion, comes from an inferiority complex of what one can call intellectualism. Ali Mazrui very much talks about how Sheikh Anta Diop of Senegal from West Africa really misunderstood the entire discussion of civilization by making sure that every time somebody raises white civilization, he will go back and claim that civilization to be an African. I think in the same token, what had happened to the African intellectual thinking in the last 60 years, in my opinion, is in search, because we have been searching for a point of pride in our own history. Ethiopia was presented to us, particularly by Christian Western intellectuals, that Ethiopia is the closest thing that Africa has that mimics or mirrors what's called European civilization. Most people don't know this, but the whole pride in which Africans and people of color feel in Ethiopia is nothing other than in search of something to hang on to that can be compared to the European civilization and ancient European way of life. With that comes a blanket, if you will, a blanket endorsement of anything Ethiopian, forgetting the fact that Ethiopia is the only imperial state that we have in the continent that not only colonized black people like ourselves who are sitting here, but also enslaved and participated in the slave trade in a big way, selling to the market of human trading of many nationalities, including Gambela, Benishangul, Oromos, even as Somalis, as some history is now showing us. So this whole concept of now jumping onto the issue of Africanizing the Ethiopian conflict, not knowing that they are perpetuating colonial history and bringing back centralization, something that Africans fought against, is really an intellectual bankruptcy. I think when I see always the former Nigerian president Obasanjo doing shuttle diplomacy between Mekelle and Addis Ababa, the very first thing that comes to me is a Biafran poet, Christopher Akimbo, who was one of the giant African poets in the 1960s. And when he saw what was happening to the people of Igbo, he basically threw away the centralized concept of Nigeria and he stood against genocide of the Biafra. Did not get much traction because at the time everybody was married to this concept of Nigerian unity, but Christopher Akimbo literally walked away from Nigerian nationality. So I think when I see Obasanjo doing this and paying blind eye to the genocide taking place now in Ethiopia, particularly in Tigray and now in Oromia, I just wonder if he hunkers back to Christopher Okombo's poetry and really finds some solace in what happened in his own country, Nigeria, and probably understanding. But it looks like many, including him, ignore that. The last thing I will add to this is his Nigerian author also, Enwela Soyinka, very much talks about what he calls the African sorrow, the African pain, which is this, in a way, neglected and intentionally ignored national question is often sold to the outside as tribal issues, which again, Ethiopian intellectuals in some circles would like to tell to the rest of Africans and Black people that the fight in Ethiopia is one of tribes. So they want to propagate the idea that says bring the tribes into a nation, where Ethiopia has never been a nation. It's an imperial country that is multinational. And I think, I don't know when that will be, but there would be a movement to educate Africa and African intellectuals that it's about time to recognize Ethiopia as an internal, organic, local imperial power that needs to be undone and undermined to the extent possible, or even reorganized if people can work out something that collectively fits their interests.
Thank you, Faisal. Professor Eskel, I think you will continue on that question. Before that, I just want to show our viewers, this is in the Prime Minister, June 2018, speaking to artists in Addis Ababa, talking about how he compares and contrasts Jews and Black people.
ጥቁር ደግሞ እዚህ ላይ ቆሞ ትናንትና ከገረፉ ገደሉ እንዲያደረጉ ይላል። አሁን ያለው ትውልድ ትናንትና ውስጥ እንዲኖር አደረገው። እነዚህ ደግሞ አሁን ነገ ውስጥ እንዲያስብ አደረጉት። 50 ዓመት አልሞላም ጁ ሀብታም ሆነ፣ ጁ ፓወርፉል ሆነ፣ ጥቁር ነፃ ደሃ ሆነ። ነፃነቱን አግኝቷል፣ መዝፈን ይችላል፣ ግን ደህንነቱን መቀየር አልቻለም።
And this is not the first, I mean, the only time he talked about the subject. And in Afan Oromo, a year after that, by October 2019, he spoke about the same idea of victimizing Black people, Black Americans, and so on. So here he says the Blacks continue to sing and complain about being oppressed and tortured, saying the whites did this and do that to us. To this day, the Blacks have not gotten anywhere. So you can comment on that as well. But how do you see what has been happening in the media from his press releases just calling on Blacks to fight for Ethiopia or to stand with Ethiopia? Professor Eskel. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I guess, I don't know. I mean, you would just, no words can express the agitation that you feel inside when he talks about something that he cannot quite understand. What he was talking about Black people in the United States, that they are in their situation because they were enriching American music and American culture. If you did say that here in the United States, that would be blatant racism. You can't say that here in the United States. Probably he doesn't understand. And for ignoramus like him, you just forgive him for not knowing. But he keeps coming back at it, denigrating Black civilization in a most public way. But right now, when this war that he unleashed against his own people in Tigray and in Oromia and other places, when it's not doing very well diplomatically, that it's not playing very well internationally, he starts to invoke the celebrated notion of Pan-Africanism and calling on Africans and all Black people to stand with Ethiopia, the country, or even in popular discourse in Ethiopia, people refer to Africans as the Blacks. They don't see themselves even as Blacks. The dominant culture in Ethiopia did not see themselves as Blacks. They always connected themselves to the Middle East, to Arab culture, or maybe Israeli culture. That's what they celebrated, not being African. But for him today to say to all Black people to stand with Ethiopia against citizens of Ethiopia, or citizens it's we don't have citizens there, but Ethiopians against other Ethiopians is absurd. If it's laughable, if it's not a serious thing that he's talking about, if it is not civil war that is going on in the country. Pan-Africanism in its history is about the sense of brotherhood. It's about the sense of collaboration of all people of African descent, whether they live inside Africa or outside Africa. It was summoning Africans to that sentiment, to that sense of togetherness and collaboration. This guy is sowing hate and discord. He's calling on Ethiopians, has been calling on Ethiopians to hate Tigrayans publicly. His advisors, his ministers, he himself had been demonizing, dehumanizing Tigrayans. And now he's calling on Africans in the spirit of Pan-Africanism to spew that venom that he had been doing against Tigrayans and other Ethiopians. That's maddening. It makes you really mad when the spirit of Pan-Africanism, Africanness, is denigrated in such a way to simply use it to continue to spew that hate that he had been doing in his own country. Pan-Africanism, as much as I have learned about it, is about the belief that people of African descent have common interest and common heritage, and that they should be unified. For a year and a half, and more than that, among with regard to the Oromo, he had been sowing seeds of division and discord. That's what he had been doing. That is what he's adept at. That's the language that he's perfected over 3 years. And today, he's calling on the rest of Africa and Black people in the African diaspora all over the world to stand with Ethiopia, to sow this seeds of discord with him and disunity. That's not Pan-Africanism. That's not the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Never been. What a shameless call on the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism in its history, it's envisioned for Black people a common homeland, the United States of Africa, unity among African nations. And now they've been conducting a genocidal campaign within one country in Africa, where the nations and nationalities in Ethiopia had been trying to come up with a mechanism of tolerance and living together under a political system called federalism. In Ethiopia, that Ethiopia was trying to deal with this sense of disunity. Now he is calling on Africans in the diaspora, to fight against another fellow Tigrayans and others who were aspiring to live within one country. That's contrary to the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which actually envisioned the entire continent as the homeland of Black people. It's so maddening to hear that they're invoking Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism had always been about the sentiment of the people of African descent to not only have a common heritage and common history, but also a common destiny, that it was a cause for celebration of the African heritage and celebration or the quest for unity in Africa. That's what it was. It's about the cause for celebration, not elimination, not eradication. He's calling on the rest of Africa for the eradication of members of the Ethiopian Federation. Don't know what to say about that, but that's so maddening. That's all I can say, that the spirit of Africa could be dragged through the gutters in order to simply satiate the insatiable lust for power that one man has. So I don't know what to say about this, but it's laughable, it's absurd, but it is a serious thing that he's doing. That he was calling on Ethiopians for the eradication, and now he invokes the spirit of Pan-Africanism for eradication. What can you say? It's only in Ethiopia this could happen.
Kitacho, if I add one thing, I think this is very important, this topic, and I think Iskael really touched the essence of Pan-Africanism. It had two big pillars in that, whether you read Nkrumah, Steve Biko, what have you. Number one, it was liberation of the African person, to liberate as a person as well as people. The second one was, as Iskael touched it, to unite the African personality. Both of them, you can today give Abiy the mark of 0. Not only he failed to even invoke the tenets of Pan-Africanism worldwide, but he failed to bring together the very people, for the better or worse, lived together for a long time, and literally failed. In terms of his offensive comments on Black Americanism, and I would say offensive because he chooses the racist established concepts that projects the Black man, a Sambo, a whiny, a person who sits around and doesn't work, somebody who failed to take advantage of the opportunities this great experiment of America offered him. That concept of the Black laziness, who did not reach, the goals that has been accorded to him, unlike others, is, in the words of probably Ibrahim Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, that book. Abiy literally invoked the concept of a Black man with a racist attitude. Black skin, white mask. Again, Francis Fanon. That's Abiy today. The other thing, not only was he racist against Black people, but he was anti-Semitic, anti-Jew, because Abiy assumed that every Jew is successful, all Jews are successful, they bond together and dominate. Actually, in one of the speeches you probably didn't finish, he says they dominate American economy. that is as anti-Semitic as it gets the way we know, because it's the Anglo-Saxon dominant culture that would like to show to other people that the Jews who come to America after the Second World War took everything into their hands and dominate. That's not really supported by facts. There may be successful Jews communities here and there, but as a group, as a race, the Jews don't dominate American economy. So I think he was double whammy. He was as racist as it gets when it comes to the black issue, very offensive, very insulting, invoking the, this whole Sambo concept of the lazy black man who doesn't take advantage of the opportunities given to him. And then that anti-Semitic. Just in the last 1 month, there have been videos being circulated around in the media. And I think Eskel touched it and said that there is this community in the Ethiopian equation that doesn't even teach its children and people that they're Africanist. There is this 1960s, I think, intercultural exchange that the US used to sponsor, where they used to bring young people, students from all over the world. There are situations where an Ethiopian, a South African white person, an Irish, all are discussing like who they are. And when you hear this 15, 16-year-old Ethiopians saying they are not Africans, they are not blacks, they are Asiatic, so and so, that is not really to blame that young person who was 15, 16, 17 years old. The culture that produced that child is the concept that Abiy is articulating when he's evaluating and measuring the black person in America.
Thank you, Faisal. Even though talking about African Union, all that, he is the only and the first Ethiopian leader to abandon an African summit in 2018 after he came to power and went to UAE with Isaias Afwerki. Not Mengistu, not Haile Mariam, Meles, Haile Selassie, of course, none of them did that before. So, but talking about what you mentioned about being black, even within Ethiopia, this is a parliament speech he made in March. He's talking about why the world is crying out only about Tigray, and he compares it with what was happening in Benshangul. So he specifically mentions that, is it because the Benshangul people are black? He said that in parliament. So let me play that one. I have technical issues. Let me see. It doesn't seem to work, but this is exactly a translation of what he said. So he was complaining, why the international community is crying out about Tigray only. So nobody mentions about what is happening in Benshangul because they are black, poor, farmers, and don't have money. That's, March 23rd, speaking to the parliament, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed. Maybe we can close this topic, and the rest of the time we can dwell on the issue of internationalization of the war. So there is a lot of arming happening in terms of Abiy Ahmed, from Iran to UAE, UAE being the widely mentioned and seen with a lot of reporting. One thing that caught my attention in terms of UAE was Feltman, when he was appointed as special envoy for the Horn of Africa, the first country he went to is UAE. And my understanding at that time was because of US involvement, even at the beginning of the war, they were trying to leverage in terms of bringing it on board on the peace talks, all that and so on. But now it's full-fledged in the war. So maybe Professor Eskel, you can start commenting on that. how you see this in terms of the impact it is having, and in terms of the peace talks that Feldman and others were talking about, how that would affect that.
I think it's been a while, especially since the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring and the implosion of Syria, the rise of the tension with Iran, and the post-petrodollar economy that the UAE and other Gulf states were building, that the United Arab Emirates had been trying to increase its presence, both militarily and economically, into the Horn of Africa. There is a rivalry in the Middle East, but what UAE is trying to do is basically to dominate the service sector in the Horn of Africa. And in some places, the UAE had been a destabilizing factor. In Djibouti, where the deal did not go through, and in Somaliland and Somalia proper, that they were the UAE are signing contracts with the federal units within Somalia, like Puntland. And when the Yemen war with the Houthi rebels started, they sought the Djibouti to help them, to give them a lease of land so that they could attack them from Djibouti. When that fell through, they found a country that was really hungry for attention after it had been isolated for many years through Ethiopian diplomacy that actually organized the entire Horn of Africa region against this pariah state called Eritrea. That opportunity to try to fight the Houthi rebels bomb them effectively from the other side, for the western side of the Red Sea, is what gave Isaias Afewerki resuscitated him from the doldrums that he was in under the diplomatic architecture that had isolated him for close to 2 decades. So the UAE is interested in the Horn of Africa, for one, for security reasons, for another, it's this post-petrodollar economy. And their avenue is the construction, logistics, particularly the Dubai Port World that was expanding its presence in the Horn of Africa, as it was doing in other places, because of the strategic importance of the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, and all the way through the Suez Canal. About 40% of world trade passes through these waterways, water lanes, and UAE was determined to dominate there, keeping Iran at bay and Qatar at bay. Because of that, they were trying to do a couple of things in the Horn of Africa region, especially in the Eastern Africa region. And maybe this is what Abiy himself copied from the Emiratis. Money can do anything. The belief that money can do anything. The UAE, because their sovereign capital now exceeds 1 trillion, they have money to spend, money to throw around. When Abiy came, they delivered $1 billion in the bank and promised 2 more if he is going to cooperate with them, cooperate in their project of trying to dominate the entire Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, and Mediterranean basin economy, and especially this Indian Ocean blue economy. Money could buy anything. They'd been paying Somaliland officials, Kenyan officials, Ethiopian officials. That's what they had been doing, and that they started to do in Ethiopia. Militarily, they also were buying up spaces for military bases. They have the money, and from there they could protect their own interest. A tiny country, but with a gargantuan appetite for dominance. And that it is in this context that the Tigray war looked like the Tigray region was an impediment to this. They have Isaias Afwerki on their side. Now they have Abiy on their side. The only one that was probably looking like they're not going to participate in the hegemony that UAE, the economic and military hegemony, UAE in concerts with Saudi Arabia, were trying to establish in the Horn of Africa, was the Tigray leadership. Fiercely nationalistic. That's what they had demonstrated when they too dominated, that is, I mean, the TPLF dominated Ethiopian politics. In the quest to eliminate, and this is really important, in their quest to eliminate any opposition to their project, UAE participated in a genocide in Ethiopia. Now they are providing munitions, shells for their artilleries, drones right now. And not only did they participate in the genocide the first time around, but UAE had continued to finance, to foot the bills, and also direct military support to the tune of, I think, about 93 Illusion airplanes that took off from Dubai all the way to Addis or the Bishop to Harar Meida. So in their quest to dominate that region economically and militarily, they are willing to go and help a government that is conducting genocide. And when I say this genocide, it's not like I don't understand the technical and the legal sense of the term. Let's be clear that the United States government is looking into this allegation, whether what Ethiopia and Eritrea did in Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia is legally and technically fits the definition the definition of genocide, and therefore a designation by the State Department or the Secretary of State. So UAE is financing genocide in Ethiopia.
Good. I think the idea of political money in the whole, as were written by Alex Doll in this book from 2015, The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa. I think you're right in saying that Abiy Ahmed is the newcomer to this, the new addition. Isaias has been doing this, over the past 2 or 3 decades, I guess. And it's sad, Ethiopia, the newcomer, and it's starting this with on its own people in terms of this genocidal war and so on. Faisal, you can speak to that, and maybe you can speak to why the US is, just idly looking at this happening.
Yeah, I think Skial very much explained the dynamics of the United Arab Emirates and its role in pursuing total control of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean because of the economic interest that it has, or it think it may have in the future. Because the Horn of Africa, we're talking about a huge population. I really would have designated this panel something like the agony of our history, in the sense that in the 1940s, Somalia was feeding the United Arab Emirates. It has sent several boats of goats, sheep, and camel to feed the Arabs when they were poor. This is well documented. And today, what the United Arab Emirates and the petrodollar countries are carrying, generally in the Horn of Africa, is really the agony of genocide. And this panel is probably the agony of genocide, if I may say so. I am really very much concerned, not only the United Arab Emirates, but also the West. We do understand diplomatically there's a very close affinity, and that's how you started, Getachew, your question, a close affinity between the United States of America, and the petrodollar countries, particularly UAE and Saudi Arabia. I'm a bit weary to 100% believe that United Arab Emirates does such a massive arming of an autocrat, i.e. Abiy, without the tacit or implicit approval of the United States of America. The current Atlantic magazine has the front article, the lead article, saying the autocrats are winning. And the autocrats that are featured on the front page of that magazine are the president of Turkey, China, and Putin of Russia. And I think the other one is one of the Eastern European countries. And in the first page of that lead article, it says, if the 20th century was the story of liberal democracy's progress towards victory over other ideologies such as communism and fascism and nationalism, the 21st century is so far a story of reversal, meaning that autocratic rulers are winning. What is very sad is that the United States of America at this juncture is watching, implicitly or explicitly approving the United Arab Emirates to arm to the teeth one of the strongest and possibly very soon entrenched African autocrat in the continent, Abiy. I don't believe that the US is completely oblivious to what the United Arab Emirates is doing. They know it. They know precisely to the penny and the little, parts that UAE is sending. So is Turkey. I think Eskiel very much in detail talked about genocide. Genocide usually doesn't happen by one person or one entity. It's a conglomerate group of people or countries or actors that partake in the genocide. Definitely, Abiy and his team are not the only perpetrators of the genocide that's currently happening in former Ethiopia. There are other actors, and we identified so far. United Arab Emirates is one of them. Turkey is another. What I am suspecting, and this is as an American citizen, I am really questioning how far is America is going, A, to close its eyes, or B, to even be a tacit complicit in this action. There is nothing that is hidden from the United States. Is the United States waiting until 500,000 people are killed, 1 million killed, chambers of torture and burning of live people are shown all over the world? Is that when the United States of America is waiting? There is no reason for us to believe that Feltman did not know what the United Arab Emirates was doing. Add to that, Getachew, the fact that Mr. Feltman went out of his way last week to appease those who support, encourage, and push Abiy to go as far as he can with this genocide. He appeared on ISAT TV, and it was a deliberate decision by Jeffrey Feltman to appease those forces. I really want some high-level lawyers and investigators to request what you call FAFSA, request for information, to find out how much we know as an American community and as American citizens in terms of US knowledge of the involvement of United Arab Emirates and what the US would like to say about this. Because when you talk about genocide, it really transcends daily politics. Having said that, I bemoan the fact that the State Department is at its weakest point in American history, at least in the last 50 years. The likes of Secretary Brzezinski is no longer here. you see the breadth of knowledge of Africa in the State Department, and that needs to be underlined. Thank you.
I think that if you don't have anything to add, we can go to the final words. But before that, talking about the genocide, on November 19th, on NPR, Senator Mendez was there. He was talking about the Tigray and Ethiopia war, and he was asked directly if he thinks what's happening is genocide. And I quote him, he says, yes, that's what it is, and it should be called out that way. And he said that he's the chair of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and there is, for me, a clear disparity between what people like him know and say versus what the White House and the State Secretary is playing in terms of supporting indirectly what Abiy is doing. Professor Skel, your final words for today?
I guess what I might add to what why the United States is remain reticent, not able to act, and I don't even think that they will be able to act. And I don't really know what I mean when they should act. Maybe intervene. I don't know. The first thing is that the United States does not have a leverage at this point in time. If what we are asking for in the Horn of Africa is democratization or some kind of participatory politics, the United States has no ground to stand on. It doesn't have the moral authority that it used to have as the spreader of freedom and democracy. After Mr. Trump, the United States has lost credibility, its credibility as the champion of democracy. Its own democracy was undermined. And if we're not for the election of 2020, we could have seen the rise of fascism even in the United States, and politicians like the former Secretary of State had written a book warning about fascism. And Timothy Snyder, a very well-known student of totalitarianism, had also written a book about warning the United States about fascism. This has the gridlock, the inability to do anything in the United States economically. Look at the infrastructure in this country. There is no infrastructure bill. I think they have signed it maybe this time after many, many years, that the level of spending in the United States in infrastructure, which was about 1% per year in the early 1980s, had now fallen to 0.3% of the economy. So it doesn't have the economic ground to stand on and lecture about what to do to the rest of the world. It doesn't have the moral authority to lecture the rest of the world about democratization. It just doesn't have the leverage because the new dictators, as they're called. I think Faisal mentioned an article about the new dictators, and there was another book that is with this same title that was written about 3-4 years ago, maybe even more, that talks about the new dictators, that they are absolutely different from Dobson is the name, the new dictators, is that they are different. Putin, the guy that died in Venezuela, forgot his name, or Turkey, all of these are new dictators. These are not above the law. They use the law to dictate, that they're dictators not as a matter of trumping laws that are of their country, but they rule by law. They rule by decree, and that has gone around. And in China, in particular, under Xi Jinping, the rule by law, dictatorship that delivers in terms of economic output, that model is winning. That model simply looks like it is winning. The democracies are debating even on essential issues such as building roads and infrastructure, but the efficiency of the new dictators is so clear. China might be the largest economy. Maybe it is already the largest economy in the world. It's challenging the United States militarily, so it has no leverage to act as it used to be. Secondly, the issue of human rights for the United States is no longer such an important issue. Human rights in present-day American political parlance is seen as the weapon of the weak. It's only American presidents that are weak, like Jimmy Carter, that actually talk about human rights. Even Barack Obama had put it on the back burner, that the human rights is not the guiding principle of American foreign policy. It's not the prism through which America looks at the rest of the world. And thirdly, all politics are local. That is to say, the Ethiopian community just delivered the governorship in Virginia to a Republican, an unlikely winner. So the local politics, local democratic politics in many states in the United States is also dictating and tying the hands of the administration. So the United States is probably not in a position to act at this point. It might not act to do anything. So they might want to counsel the regime, the existing regime, become maybe a benevolent dictator, but release political prisoners, but not remove him from power. Maybe make them one of those competent dictators like Erdogan in Turkey, who are less brutal, but iron fist rule. Maybe that's what the United States wants: stability over the liberty and security and freedom of people. So I don't expect the United States to be able to act. They will act only where the local powers, political powers within Ethiopia act, and power seems to tilt one way or the other. Then they will go with the winner in that situation. But it's not even in a position to act. That's why I think that the United States has not acted to stop genocide at this point in time.
I'm glad, Faisal, you mentioned about this. I just noticed that this is written by Anne Applebaum. We have actually covered her book, Twilight of Democracies. That's very relevant what's happening in Ethiopia, how the elite is revolving around the dictator, and how that is the same, across the board, in all countries, and like Professor Eskel was mentioning. Your final word, Faisal?
Yeah. So I think this article is finally showing, the West, that maybe the West is losing the war, and the autocratic system, as you see, these powerful men, all of them autocrats, seem to be riding on a wave that is, at the winning. In terms, her argument is that I think some of the issues that Scale covered ring bell with me. As a Somali, I never expect America to be on the side of people who are struggling for their rights. The two countries that really supported Ethiopia to set Somaliland to Ethiopia were primarily the US and Britain in the 1940s and 50s. And just to give you how the US has been unconditionally supportive of Ethiopia. In 1953, you recall, when the Haile Selassie's constitution was to be drafted, the US gave to that project about $13 million, which is in today's money, $150 million, just to write a meaningless constitution that is still maintained a theologically based imperial court. So I don't expect the US to do much of a difference when it comes to the struggle that the people of Ethiopia carry out to get their rights and freedom. I think what's very interesting to me, and I tweeted this, is that the two worst genocides in the continent of Africa are taking place under two democratic administrations. Rwanda took place when Clinton was the president, and this one in Ethiopia, Tigray and now Oromia, is taking place under a democratic. No wonder that it's called, the Democratic Party is called the dove, meaning the weak, when it comes to foreign policy and what have you. I think I will not debate the issue of America's loss in search for expansion of democratic systems, because I think that role has been lost some time ago, as Scale was saying, 4, 5, 6 years ago, and several studies have been carried out just to show on a GIS the number of countries that have fallen on the wayside when it comes to democratization, and they are huge, big numbers. So America has been really neglecting this whole issue of democratization. What I like to emphasize on this is, and I'm not a lawyer, but in my mind, it really kind of comes back. The genocide being carried through jets and drones consist of parts, different parts. Most of the parts and technologies manufactured in America. If you have followed the debate of slavery and the slave economy in the United States, African Americans had identified through methodical research all those companies and universities such as Johns Hopkins that took part in the perpetuation and the benefit from the proceedings of slavery. And some of them are now going after those companies and institutions. I'm really raising the question of the parts and the manufacturers of the parts being used by the United Arab Emirates, drones, and Turkey, the companies that produce, the role the United States government plays in approving the purchase of those materials. Where does responsibility lie, and where does the role of and I said earlier, genocide takes place because of a number of groups contributing. Where does the US responsibility and role in the perpetuation of the genocide taking place in Ethiopia, particularly in Tigray and in Oromia, stops? Would there be a day where some high-level lawyers could identify the companies that are supplying parts and technology to United Arab Emirates, to Turkey and others, then being used against people of Ethiopia? I think I would like to raise that, to throw that to the public so that people can entertain. United Arab Emirates and Turkey are not the only players, are not the only responsible entities here. The companies whose products are being used to kill people who are sleeping in their homes in Mekelle, in Western Oromia, have the right to know who is involved and whose part is being used to take lives of their families and of their children and mothers and sisters.
I think that's a very good point to end the show today. Thank you for your time this week, and hopefully we'll again come back with the H panel next week to monitor and get your insight on what has happened and what might happen. Thank you for your time for today. You have been following UMD Media's weekly H panel. The H panel is raising issues and discussing on what has happened during the week and what are the most important things that we should be following. And your host was Getachew Asafa. Those who have followed us on YouTube and Facebook Live, thank you for that. And we want you to encourage others as well to tune in. So do subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, share, so that many can access this material. Bye for today.